Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The United States presidential election is just 3 weeks away, and ahead of that, Kamala Harris is leading key polls. But the race between the Democrat nominee and Republican Donald Trump remains very close. According to the latest Times Siena poll, Kamala Harris is leading by 4 percentage points nationally at 49% compared to Trump at 46%. Donald Trump is leading in Florida by 13 percentage points and by 6 percentage points in Texas. Now, the poll in 7 key battleground states are very, very close in what could make it difficult for Democrats to pass legislations if Kamala Harris wins is that the Republicans, according to this poll, are poised to win a majority in the Senate. Now, as per 538, Harris has a 2.4 percentage point lead over Trump, with Harris at 48.4 percentage points and Trump at 46%. Kamala Harris is leading in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada by 1 percentage point, and Trump is leading in North Carolina and Georgia by 1 percentage point. According to the Hill and Emerson College poll, Harris has a 2.9% lead over Trump. She's at 49.7% points versus Trump at 46.8%. Trump is leading by 1 percentage point in Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and by 2 percentage points in Arizona. Harris and Trump are deadlocked in Michigan and Wisconsin at 49%. In Nevada, Kamala Harris is leading by 2 percentage points. So that is where the U.S. election stands right now. Let's get in our experts. We're now joined by Aaron Kall, professor and director of debate at the University of Michigan. Also with us is Mukesh Aghi, president of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Mukesh Aghi, what do you feel about Donald Trump right now? Why do you think he has been able to continue holding on to the numbers he has?
Well, the race is too close to call. While the poll shows that Kamala Harris leads by 4 percentage points on a national level, but you have to understand this is an electoral vote, and in the 7 swing states, the call is just too close for either one of them. Why is Donald Trump leading? You have to understand, basically, people know Donald Trump as a person and his policies. They know Kamala Harris as a person, but don't know her policy itself. What is happening is while they like Donald Trump's policies, they don't like Donald Trump as an individual, as a personality. Whereas in the case of Kamala Harris, they like her as a person, but don't understand her policies. And the more important thing is, if you look at the polls show on immigration and economic issue, it is favored towards Donald Trump itself. And those are the 2 big issues. And the third big issues, which I think is going to come in as October surprise, is the international turmoil. What's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Middle East. If that turmoil gets much deeper, broader, then I think you will see a much more swing going towards Donald Trump, because voters prefer a male president to deal with those issues itself. So I think the race is too close to call, and we'll see what happens in the next 3 weeks also.
That's what John Bolton also told us a short while back, that in case there is an all-out war, it will be advantage Donald Trump. Professor Kall, coming to you, what do you think will impact things in the next 3 weeks? It all goes down to the wire in those key swing states, 6 or 7 states. What do you think will be a decider now?
Yeah, I mean, whether there's another presidential debate, which seems unlikely, that could be one thing. The economy, the stock markets, and kind of what, interest rates and housing looks like. And as previously mentioned, international issues, the Middle East and Ukraine, we may be too late for an October surprise, but things like hurricanes and foreign policy, those could make the very small difference in a very close election.
Right. As someone who analyzes debates very closely, how have the 2 candidates appeared in their campaign speeches? Who has emerged stronger, according to you? And why do you think Kamala Harris has not been able to capture the imagination? Yes, she is popular. She has the lead. But why are we not seeing a clear edge?
Yeah, I mean, we had the debate in June, and Donald Trump, very easily dispatched Joe Biden and caused him to leave the race. Kamala Harris has, did very well in her one presidential debate against Donald Trump. And That was several weeks ago, and since then, her lead has decreased, and she's called for another debate. But Donald Trump has not taken the bait and accepted that, and he's just kind of maintained a very disciplined message on the campaign trail and advertisements that are very controversial. So, she is the incumbent vice president, and she's closely tied to Joe Biden for the last 3.5 years. And so there's a big question of, who is the change candidate. Obviously, she would be the first female president. Hillary Clinton was close, but didn't close the deal in 2016. So, there's a lot of things kind of going against her, inflation and, what's happened in the last several years. And she entered the race very late in the last few months, and it's kind of an uphill battle. And she's pulled even where Joe Biden was points and points behind. And so in the last month or so, she has a very uphill task, but it's just close because the country is so polarized and people really like kind of a change candidate in a different party every 4 years or so.
Right. Right. That's indeed important. Mr. Aghi, what is the mood in the U.S. industry right now as we see the election drawing to a close? What kind of impetus do you expect U.S. and India ties, especially the business ties, to get in the coming weeks?
Well, the U.S. election do have an impact on the business community, especially on the taxation side. And they are concerned that Kamala Harris may come in and come down very hard on raising the taxes on the corporate side. But I think on the U.S.-India front, you have to understand it is driven by multiple factors. And it is driven by one important factor, and that is China. Both Democrats and Republicans agree that China is the adversary, and we need to take that adversary head on. India becomes critical from that perspective, not only just being partner with India managing China, but also de-risking supply chain from China into India itself. More important is India as a $4 trillion economy is becoming a $5 trillion economy. That brings more market opportunity for U.S. companies to leverage that. But again, one more step, we are seeing a massive movement of global capability centers being set up in India. And today we have roughly around 1,700 and exporting roughly $125 billion worth of IP out of these centers. So I think there are multiple factors which are driving this relationship, regardless of who comes in, either Trump or Kamala Harris. The relationship between India and the U.S. will continue in the upward trajectory.
Right. Professor Kall, if I were to ask you about which states is this election really going to boil down to? Because we're seeing Kamala Harris leading in some states, Trump leading in some states by almost 1 or 2 percentage points. It's very close. Which states you think will really matter in this election?
Yeah, so there's 7 total states. The most 3 important for the Democrats and Kamala Harris are Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, the blue wall states. As long as Kamala Harris wins those 3, plus the 1 congressional district in Nebraska, that'll get her the 270 electoral votes to win. The other states that are maybe a little more reach and up for grab, the Sunbelt states, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. And
Right. Let me go across to Mukesh Aghi at this point. Mr. Aghi, we are seeing Donald Trump speak very highly about tariffs. He has hit out at India in the past, saying that India plays its game very well. It has been a beneficiary of the US regime, and therefore he has promised high tariffs, not just for India, but for many countries, including China. What is the conversation you expect in New Delhi next week when the USISPF board members come to Delhi? There is going to be a mega summit. What is going to be the discourse around elections, around tariffs?
So I think the 2 parts to the question I like to answer. One is we will review last 12 months of the progress between US and India, especially on the business side, and then understand the current policy of the government as to what else we need to do to keep on driving investment, keep on driving technology into India from the US itself. So it's going to be assessing what went right, what went wrong, and moving forward next 12 months. As far as the tariff goes, I think you have to understand the tariff hurts the US consumer more than anybody else. And I think we put the tariffs on Chinese, but the export of China into the US did not come down with the tariffs. It's the consumer which had to pay higher prices for those goods itself. So I think, hopefully, if Trump comes back, tariff would not be a policy-making process. It could be one of the tools, but not the main tool or trying to deal with China and other countries exporting into the US itself. So from our perspective, I think it's important to understand that the relationship between the two countries is strong. In fact, President Trump praised Prime Minister Modi, called him a dear friend, a strong leader itself. So I think both from a personal level and also from a country-to-country level, the relationship is strong and will continue in the positive direction.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Aghi and Professor Kall, for joining us here on the program. So we're looking at a very close election race, and whatever happens in the United States is extremely important for India as well. We'll be watching out for this election very, very closely. We're heading into a short break at this point, but coming up, we speak to John Bolton, former National Security Advisor to the United States, on the upcoming elections in the US and rising tensions in West Asia, the options for US and Israel at this point, and in case there is an all-out war, how does the current regime in the United States get impacted? Stay tuned. That conversation coming up. Welcome back. We're now joined by a distinguished guest who has played a pivotal role in shaping US foreign policy over the past few decades. Joining us right now is John Bolton, former National Security Advisor and a prominent figure in international relations. We'll discuss his views on current geopolitical challenges globally, especially in West Asia, also the US role in the region as well. Ambassador Bolton, thank you for being with us here on Global Eye. Let me ask you about the escalating crisis in the Middle East. Netanyahu and Biden have been in touch over the last few days. Do you believe there is consensus between Israel and the United States to retaliate against Iran?
Well, I think there's agreement that retaliation is going to happen and that this time it can be justified. I don't think there's any agreement between Washington and Jerusalem as to what that retaliation ought to be. In fact, just reading the tea leaves, and I admit it's speculation, I don't think Israel has told the United States yet what its principal options are. And as best we can determine, it doesn't look as though the Israeli War Cabinet has yet made a final decision. I think there's distrust between Netanyahu and Biden, and I think therefore Israel is not doesn't feel that it should be sharing with Washington exactly what it may have in mind.
Are we close to a full-fledged war?
Well, I don't think so, because I think the Israeli effort here is to inflict enough damage on Iran to make it clear that any further escalation by Iran would be really devastating. And I think that's what Israel is trying to calculate in deciding what its retaliation for the October 1 ballistic missile attack will be. I mean, my own view, it's only my own view, is that Israel should go after Iran's nuclear weapons program, for example, rather than the oil export facilities. Going after the nuclear program is what really threatens Israel and the United States and others for that matter, and doesn't really affect the citizens of Iran. But we'll see. It's a complex decision for Israel.
Right. You've also said that dealing with the Middle East crisis will be a failure if we fail to address Iran. Now, you were suggesting that one option and a good option before Israel is to target Iranian nuclear facilities. But Iran will treat us as an act of war, and it could lead to a full-fledged war in the region. Don't you think so?
Well, you know, on October 1st, the second attack directly from Iranian soil on Israel, the first being back in April with 320 projectiles, about 130 drones, 70 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles, followed on October 1 with 180 ballistic missiles fired from Iran toward Israel. And just to put that in perspective, that is the largest ballistic missile attack in human history. So I would say if you're an Israeli looking at that pattern of behavior by Iran, and knowing that you can't be sure that the next ballistic missile headed your way from Iran might not have a nuclear weapon under the nose cone, this isn't time to fool Iran. Iran has been attacking Israel since October the 7th of last year through its terrorist proxy groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, and others. And Israel has endured that for a year. So the war for Israel is already about as wide as it gets.
Right. I'd like to also ask you, how does this war actually impact the US election? Does it really help the Democrats? It's always said that no one wants a war, but how will it impact the Democrats' campaign?
Well, I think the fear in the White House is that the war in the Middle East combined with the war in Ukraine hurts Kamala Harris. And their reasoning is the world looks chaotic, which it is, and they fear that responsibility for the chaos will be blamed on the Biden administration, number one. Specifically with respect to the Middle East, if hostilities continue to rise to a higher level, there's every prospect there could be a spike in global oil prices. That in turn could affect gasoline prices at the pump in the United States and the cost for goods and services that have to be transported. So a price rise right before the election also would be a bad thing for the administration. So on balance, I think it's the Biden administration and Vice President Harris who are most worried about the potential effect.
What could really bring this war to an end in terms of negotiations? And do you think negotiations have taken place in the right earnest in Qatar?
You know, I think people with good motives have tried for negotiations, but honestly, I think Israel is past the point where they're going to negotiate with terrorists. In fact, I would say as a general proposition, looking at the American negotiation with Taliban under Trump and Biden, that you can't trust terrorists for any deal that you make with them. They may adhere to it for a while because it's in their self-interest, but ultimately they just view a ceasefire as a pause for them to regroup. I think Israel is determined to dismember Hamas and Hezbollah. They're well on the way to doing it. They've got a lot more to do, but they've done a lot already. That's severely weakened Iran in the Middle East, and I think if depending on what Israel's upcoming retaliation for October 1 looks like, Iran's power could be diminished even further. Those are the circumstances under which you might negotiate with Iran, which is really the source of this problem.
Right. Ambassador Bolton, in case Donald Trump wins the election, which is a possibility because the election remains too close to call, Kamala Harris is in the lead, but it is within the margin of error. How would Trump's approach be different compared to Biden right now, to Iran and to the war in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, I think it's very hard to judge because Trump doesn't think in policy terms. He doesn't really have a national security philosophy. He thinks in terms of what's good for him. He has said on a number of occasions he could make peace. He could make a deal with Iran. He came very close to meeting Javad Zarif, who was then the Iranian foreign minister at the G7 summit in August of 2019 in Biarritz, France. He met with Kim Jong-un to talk about the North Korean nuclear weapons program. I could see him meeting with Iran. You just don't know with Trump. What you do know is he will tell you he'll do a lot better than Biden. He won't explain how. Trust him.
I would like to also ask you about the manner in which the attacks have taken place in the last few days. For example, a senior commander of the Iran Quds Force, Ismail Urani, who traveled to Lebanon after Hezbollah killed Hassan Nasrallah. He has not been seen so far. It is believed that he is a Mossad agent, according to some reports. What do you think may have happened?
Well, it's very hard to tell. And I think Iran's latest statement is they deny that he's been killed. But in the chaos that we see increasingly in Beirut now, there's just no telling. I mean, I do think the Israelis and opponents of the regime in Iran have infiltrated both the Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guards in Iran more broadly. And I think that's a sign that the regime in Tehran is not as strong as it may look from the outside. I think there's enormous popular discontent. And I think it's among those discontented Iranians that Israel finds allies who can both carry out espionage and also clandestine activities.
Right. What do you think could be the role of countries like China and Russia in fanning the war in the Middle East, supporting Iran and its proxies?
Well, I think it's a very serious problem for the international community as a whole. I think what's happening at a macro level internationally is there's increasingly an axis being formed between Beijing and Moscow, like the Sino-Soviet alliance of the Cold War, except this time Beijing is the dominant partner. And I think that China's hegemonic ambitions, first along its own periphery in the Indo-Pacific, but then ultimately worldwide, combined with Russia, the outriders like Iran and North Korea and others, is really the big security challenge for the world for the rest of the century. And I think we're seeing it play out in the Middle East right now. It could shift elsewhere, obviously, to South or East Asia.
That's all we have on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more news and updates.